Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and we appreciate the feedback we've been getting on these episodes of the Lunch Hour. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe there and leave us a like and a review. You can also listen to us on just about every major podcast platform. And if you're listening on those major podcast platforms, likewise, leave a review, subscribe, let us know what you think of what's going on. And please spread the word about the Lunch Hour with your friends, your family members' friends, your friends' family members. That's how we grow the audience of this program. Really excited to bring our guest on today. It's been a bit since he and I have spoken. His name is Tarren Bragdon. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation for Government Accountability, which he founded in 2011 to advance policy solutions that open up the American dream to millions and advance free market principles. FGA has achieved more than 400 state policy reform wins in 30 plus states, as well as 20 big federal public policy reforms. And those are old numbers, Tarren, so I'm sure we'll go through some of the latest numbers as well. Prior to joining and forming FGA, Tarren served as the Chief Executive Officer at the Maine Heritage Policy Center. Did we meet while you were there?
Yes, so long ago.
Yeah. He also served in the Maine House of Representatives and remains the youngest person elected to the Maine legislature, serving from 1996 to 2000. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from the University of Maine and a Master's of Science in Business from Husson. I know I'm mispronouncing that university. Is that right? Is it Husson or Houston?
No, you got it right, Husson.
Husson, there you go. He's an entrepreneur at heart and greatly values faith, family, and good policy. He enjoys traveling and lives with his wife and 4 children in Ave Maria, California. Tarren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Right. I guess, because I had gone up to Maine in like the 2005 timeframe. You were still up there, weren't you?
Well, I was. I took over as CEO of the Maine think tank in 2008.
Okay.
And did that, but I was in a policy role there before that when we first connected.
Yes, I remember that trip up there. I went and had blueberry pancakes at Dysert's, as I recall.
Yeah, you had a very Maine experience.
Yes, which was good. But you made the switch. You made the jump to Florida. That's like the most interesting kind of contrast. You know, you talk about snowbirding. What made you move out of Maine and down to Florida?
Well, great question. We vacationed to Southwest Florida and really enjoyed it here. And, you know, the great thing about growing up in a beautiful small state like Maine is you have a lot of opportunities, like being in the legislature, that you might not get in a bigger state. But our kids were getting to be school age, and we thought we really wanted to raise them in a different environment, one that was growing more economically, growing in population. And we also thought, why are we vacationing in paradise when we could live in paradise? And so we made the move 1,600 miles to Florida.
It's interesting. I know my good friend Carrie Telosco and colleague Carrie Telosco lives just up the coast from you. Actually, it was somewhere near Fort Myers. I don't remember specifically, or maybe she may be in Naples itself, which now I'm thinking is
right. That's same county, Naples.
Yeah, there you go. So that makes perfect sense. Anyway. So you leave Maine and you get this idea to form the Foundation for Government Accountability. And I love entrepreneurship in the policy world. Talk about why you felt the need to form the FGA. How did that all come about?
Well, you know, I was really thinking about a different kind of public policy organization at the time that we're thinking about making this move. And I knew Rick Scott, who was then governor of Florida, from before he was governor. We had both interacted on some healthcare policy during the whole Obamacare debates. And so it was really this combination of factors of really having this vision for how can you create a different kind of policy organization, or really the policy organization that I wish I had when I was in the legislature, one who could really partner with me to do big things. And then at the same time, having some connections in Florida, despite not living here, and building on those connections.
Sure. So what sets FGA apart from other think tanks. Well, actually, let me preface this by saying, because for those of you who don't understand, so I've worked in a number of different policy organizations in addition to the media work that I do. I had a really great mentor about 15 years ago who said, Andrew, when you're starting organizations, engaging in the entrepreneurial spirit as Tarren has done with the FGA, you have to keep in mind the acronym SUM, S-U-M. The organizations have to be strategic, they have to be unique, and the things they have to do have to be measurable. I certainly think you've done that with the FGA, but talk a little bit about how you differentiate yourself. What makes the FGA different?
Sure. Well, I think I hadn't heard that acronym before, but I think that makes a ton of sense. So one of the ways that we're different is most policy organizations are a collection of personalities or experts that really decide what aspects of that particular policy, like education or healthcare, are they going to speak about, what's going to be a priority. We're different in that we're very strategic in that we lay out our solution agenda, and then everybody in the organization is rowing in that direction towards getting those solutions implemented, whether it's at the state or the federal level. So that's one way we're different.
Sure.
The other way, it's a big difference because it's not being responsive to a few personalities. It's being strategic on a few solutions that really move the needle.
Yes.
The second way we're different. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Second mic, please.
The second way we're different is we're really about playing this inside game. So we want to work directly with educating and engaging with lawmakers rather than just providing commentary on what's happening politically. And the challenging thing, if you're playing this inside game, is you really have to be selective about what you compliment and what you criticize. Because if you're trying to build trust and credibility by working with policymakers on the inside, you need to recognize that they're elected, you're not. So that's one. Number two is they're going to make trade-offs in what's politically possible versus what's the policy ideal. And you have to be comfortable with those trade-offs rather than being a purist. And number three is if you are playing this inside game and you throw bombs, you're going to blow yourself up and sort of destroy your own credibility and trust. And, as all of us know in politics or in policy, reputations are built over decades and destroyed in a moment. And so you have to be really thoughtful about when are you going to publicly criticize versus privately raise your concerns.
I love that. It's interesting because I remember being a junior staffer at a think tank and having a number of senior staffers getting ready to go and blow up a relationship with the White House. And I was very deeply concerned about this. And that's interesting because there's a definite difference there. How much of that, Tarren, comes out of the fact that you were a legislator? Even as a young legislator, you were probably very cognizant of these things. Talk about how that informs this approach.
Well, I think it's helpful having been in elected office. I joke about being a recovering politician now, but having been in elected office, you appreciate that it's complicated. I had a district in my part of Maine, Bangor, where I grew up, was very much a swing district. We had some of the largest public housing developments north of Boston. And so that district has different priorities than maybe another district that was more rural and more solidly red. And so I think that gave me a bit more of a grounding in when you're elected and you're representing your constituents, that's a check and balance a bit. The other thing that I think gave me some context is it's very hard to sort of hug and slap somebody at the same time.
Sure.
And so I think there's folks in the policy world that say, I want to connect with you, Andrew. We're going to work together on big things. But then if I disagree with you on something big or small, I'm not shy about going public with it and beating you up. Well, you think that doesn't really happen in the business world. I don't fight with my wife on social media. But yet in the political space, we somehow think, okay, that's okay for developing relationships and that won't hurt me long term. When really, whether it's personally in business or in politics, relationships are built on trust and credibility, it doesn't mean you don't disagree, but you think about what's the best way to have those disagreements.
Right. I mean, we go down this road of and it's becoming an increasing problem where we polarize ourselves when we disagree. Like if we don't agree with somebody 100% of the time on something, we don't go down the road, or we can't find any way to agree with them on even the 20% that we otherwise should agree on. It's a very tough needle to thread, even more so nowadays. Let's talk about a little bit about why it's gotten worse. I mean, do you have any thoughts as to why it's gotten worse over the last 25 years in terms of being able to thread that needle?
Well, I do think that social media rewards whoever's quick and clever.
Yes, the hot take.
Right. But as my mom used to say, just because it's clever doesn't mean it's nice. Or in the political sense, just because it's clever doesn't mean it's expedient. And I think that there's probably not one way that's better. But if you're going to play an inside game, you can't have your scorecard be I'm the quickest and the most clever. You just want to figure out what your role is and then be true to that. And I think what happens too much in the policy world is people try to be both, and you're either a personality or you're a partner. It's really difficult to be both.
Yeah, someone who has stood astride a number of different camps, right? I've been in the activist camp and I've been in the lobbyist camp. Never been in the politician camp per se, but it's definitely right. There are two very different ways of doing things. Yours is a very savvy approach in an environment where there are a lot of bomb throwers out there, and the bomb throwers tend to get a lot of that attention, don't they?
Right. And I think too, it's just because you're getting attention doesn't mean you're effective, because the 24 hours news cycle rewards what's outrageous, and gathers a lot of attention.
And the proof is in the pudding, right? As you talk about these successes, and admittedly, the statistics that I had were from 2021. Obviously, we're 2.5 years out from that. You've had more since then. Talk about some of the successes that you've had that might not otherwise have happened because of the other way of doing advocacy.
Sure. So we've had great success with actually working with lawmakers to get good ideas turned into law. We push hundreds of ideas a year. We have a sister organization, a C4, that does direct lobbying, working with those policymakers to help move it through the legislative process, all the way from idea to drafting through implementation. And we have now had more than 900 of those reform wins. We had 200 last year. We have about a 24% win rate from introducing an idea in legislation to have it being actually signed into law. And so I think the stats speak for themselves, but it's really about, can you develop that trust and partner? And do you remember that you're not the elected official, but ultimately they are? And so they're making those trade-offs on what's possible and what's not. And the truth is, on our side, I think we should embrace an idea that if we're making incremental progress, that's still progress.
Right.
And we can always go back next year for more.
It's funny because it's one of the things that I talk about on the regulatory side. This is a good way to dovetail into the REINS Act a little bit. What I call the regulatory glide path, right? Which is a situation where we can talk about being deregulatory, which is important, right? We have a $3 trillion regulatory state. It would be great to cut regulation. On the other hand, there is enormous benefit to be had from keeping regulations on what I call the glide path, right? If we continue on the trajectory that we're on right now at the federal level, regulations are going to cost the American economy directly about $7 trillion by 2030. If we can keep them at, $3 trillion, and that's excessive, mind you, but let's say we can just keep it there, that's a $4 trillion a year, direct net benefit. And again, we can start to move to incrementally draw it down. Your thoughts there?
I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
If you think the first thing you have to do good is to do no harm, or do no further harm. I think that is a really positive thing and a really important first step. And before you can take the second step, which would logically be to cut some of those regulations, You just have to, stop the bleeding, if you will,
Right.
or stop harming businesses and taxpayers in such a significant way. And I think sometimes that it's so easy to get caught up in, I want big success overnight, when
Right.
maybe it just takes not a lot of time, but a little bit of time. And maybe it's not one big leap. Maybe it's 3 steps that add
Right.
up to one big leap.
Sure. It's interesting. When we talk about regulation, someone just posted a piece by David Brooks that they considered it brilliant. I didn't think it was particularly insightful, but it was about sort of this issue of regulation being death by 1,000 pinpricks or 1,000, razor cuts or whatever it is. The point is, it's almost, there are big regulations that obviously cause harm, but it's also the myriad small regulations that cut people off. When you think about the fact that it is death by 1,000 pinpricks, stemming some of those pinpricks and getting at that issue, it's not big and it's not flashy, but it certainly has an impact down the road, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But I also think people don't consider as much. It's not just the regulation that is proposed,
Yes.
but what, for example, the Biden administration is doing is it's creating this whole sea of uncertainty
Oh yeah.
that businesses swim in. And so it's not just, I know this regulation is going to cost me. It's, I have no idea what's coming next. And
Right.
therefore, I am cautious about making capital investments, about hiring people, about planning long term because of this unknown oppression that will come down the road.
This gets down to, again, the issue of the regulatory glide path, right? The issue of, if you just keep things constant and folks know what's happening, then you can make those plans. It's funny because we've done some measuring. As I said, I think I had a conversation with Ryan Young from CEI about opportunity cost issues. We estimate, or our calculations show, that for every dollar in direct regulatory cost, there's a $19 lost opportunity cost multiplier that's at work there. So it's a situation in which, if you have that certainty and you know what those expenditures are going to be, and you can make those investments, yeah, that's what we're talking about, isn't it, Tarren?
Absolutely. Maybe consider this in a different context. So my wife and I, we have 4 kids. We have 2 teenage drivers now.
Yes.
The uncertainty of having 2 teenage drivers is that we won't be buying a new car anytime soon.
Right.
Because we need to get through these, high risk years and the uncertainty that comes with it before we'll make that capital investment. I say that a little tongue in cheek, but it's no different for the American entrepreneur.
100%, because in the end, right? I mean, I listen. I'll tell a personal story for a second. I wanted a new easy chair. I haven't had a new easy chair in over 20 years. Wanted a new easy chair for Christmas. I went out and priced them. Had found one that I liked. Price seemed a little high. Either way, the bottom line is, I don't feel comfortable going and buying it, because I know that I just had to plunk down X number of dollars because of an alignment and wheel and tire issue with one of my kids' cars, and I know I'm going to have to buy 4 tires for my wife's car at some point in time. This is what we're talking about here. Let's talk about some of the big ticket items though, real quick, Tarren, because I want to. Because we're talking about regulation. You guys have done a lot of work. My good buddy Phil Kerpen over at American Commitment has done work on this. We've all sort of said our piece. Talk about the REINS Act. And I'm wondering if you guys have, and I don't know this, and I shouldn't ask a question I don't know the answer to. I'm fairly certain you guys have started proposing some analogs to the REINS Act at the state level. Talk about this.
Sure. So the REINS Act would simply say that Congress should have the last word when it comes to costly regulations that cost either businesses or taxpayers more than $100 million per year. Congress sets the policy, Congress holds the purse strings, and so Congress should be the final word on whether or not that bureaucratic action could go forward. And you just alluded to this, but this is not a brand new idea.
Right.
In fact, lots of states have a state level version of this. Florida, Wisconsin, Colorado, West Virginia, even my home state of Maine, all has some variation on this, that significant regulatory actions have to be signed off by the legislature. The executive or the executive branch can't act on their own. And what this does is it really keeps the check and balance between the legislature setting the policy and the executive branch executing on that policy, which is the exact opposite that we've seen in DC, where through a bureaucrat with a pen and a power trip, the Biden administration has been enacting massive policy changes to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars per action without getting Congress to sign off. Probably the biggest example of this is the student debt bailout, but there's a bunch of others.
So it's interesting because we've spent a lot of time talking about this issue of significant rules, major rules. The idea that, at least from the congressional viewpoint, rules that cost the economy more than $100 million a year or more. The Biden administration back in the springtime announced changes to their definition of it. They've now doubled that. So clearly there's a disconnect between what the administration is saying a major rule is and what Congress has said that a major rule is. Talk a little bit about how we square that. Talk about the other things that the Biden administration is doing on the issue of what's considered major and how they're sort of fudging these numbers, shall we say.
Well, I think one of the ways that the Biden administration is being much more aggressive on this front is they are specifically targeting policy changes that could never get through this Congress or the previous Congress, like the student debt bailout. They also had massive expansions in the welfare state, just through a stroke of the pen, dramatically increasing food stamp benefits, dramatically changing Medicaid and how it operates as a program. And those have costs on the state and the federal side, as well as a whole host of regulations that affect businesses, like their changes to the electronic vehicle tax credit structure. So they're acting more like a dictator, with being the implementer of the policy, as well as the enforcer, rather than having this check and balance with business. And what it adds up to is, just through executive action, the Biden administration has proposed more than $1 trillion in additional spending over the next decade, just through executive action. So Congress is debating the budget, but that's what the Biden administration is doing all on their own.
And that's on the spending side of it. And then we know it's about $750 billion in new regulatory costs, again, through the same thing. It's funny because our colleague Wayne Cruz, and I think he's right in this, on both sides of it, both on the regulatory side of it, on the direct spending side of it, the left, and I'm now going to use it as sort of as a blanket term, they have essentially officially said they don't care about how much things cost anymore. They don't care about regulatory costs. They just care about benefits. They don't care about spending costs. They just care about benefits. Obviously, they don't care about the Constitution. They just care about benefits. Talk about this.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. And when you think about what that's doing to both sides of the ledger. So you're spending money through executive action that commits taxpayers to hundreds of billions of dollars, $1 trillion in additional spending. As soon as that's proposed by the bureaucracy, it goes into the baseline that affects future spending. So it's literally a stroke of the pen and then it's done. And there's very little to undo it that Congress can do. And then on the business side, as you were talking about, you're creating this uncertainty and adding costs to them, which reduces growth and job creation in the economy, which affects tax revenue. So you're literally like increasing expenses and then decreasing tax revenue at the same time, just through regulations.
Let's talk about the unintended consequences on the spending side. You and I think could spend hours talking about the regulatory side, and I've spent a lot of time in the show talking about it. But for instance, I did, I got hit to some proposed changes to childcare subsidies, and we ran the numbers and we discovered, and it's not, again, not rocket science here, that when you expand subsidies for childcare, you actually make childcare more expensive. Talk about this in terms of other subsidies that are out there and how the unintended consequence is it makes whatever good it is you're subsidizing much, much more expensive and much more scarce. Talk about that.
I think the child care is a good example, because a lot of times those subsidies come with strings attached that say, if you're going to receive this child care subsidy, you have to operate a facility that looks like this, which then takes off the table like some home-based childcare, or maybe exchanging with parents like most of us do. So that subsidy not only does it artificially, subsidize the cost of it, which raises costs, but it also sets this new regulatory standard for childcare facilities that are accepting that subsidy, which raises the costs for everyone else, whether they're receiving the subsidy or not. So people don't really think about how this one change affects me, even if it doesn't seem like I'm directly impacted. Like if I get childcare unsubsidized, I am directly impacted by the strings attached to those subsidies.
Right. Right. And just the more people who are going out and affording this, and it makes it harder for me to find it. It becomes more scarce. I want to turn our attention, because you guys do great research. You just have a piece out about private insurance and the expansion of Medicaid. This is yet another example of this. Talk about what you guys just put out on the 16th of January.
Sure. So this is a good example of, as you expand a government program, you make the private program more unaffordable. So Medicaid expansion takes people out of the private insurance market who would otherwise be there. Medicaid pays far below cost. And so healthcare providers need to make up for that difference by charging more for those with private insurance. And then those people with private insurance need to pay higher taxes to fund the expanded Medicaid program. So it's this double whammy to the middle class in particular, of their health insurance costs go up, but their taxes also go up because of this expansion.
Let's talk about this. You and I have never chatted about this, and you and I need to talk more often. It's very clear to me you and I need to be talking more often.
I'd love that.
Say that here. Because one of the things that I focus on, my wife is a physician. She and I, for the last 15 years, maybe plus, have been talking about the supply of medical care, right? To me, and I think you will agree with this, we've been focusing in the wrong place. We focus on the healthcare issue as an insurance issue. That's the wrong way to look at it. You and I could get together and offer Andrew and Tarren's health insurance to everybody in America, and it would be valueless because we can't provide the medical care. We don't have enough medical care to go around. I'm sure you guys are working on this. What are some of the things that the FGA is doing to expand the number of medical care providers, doctors, nurses, and physicians assistants in the states and even at the federal level?
Sure. So there's some solutions that states can look at. In particular, we're working on some legislation here in Florida that looks at how do we shorten the amount of time that it takes for somebody to go into the healthcare profession, including being a doctor. So you can begin taking some of those college courses in high school and dramatically reduce the number of time to like 6 years rather than 8 years after high school to get that medical degree. You can look at the training programs, because part of what limits the supply of physicians is graduate medical education, which is government arbitrarily reducing the funnel of how many people can become trained medical providers. But one of the things that we also think is really important is, how do you provide incentives for patients to be smart consumers of healthcare? And that really means empowering patients who want to get outside of the restrictions of insurance networks. So we're pushing legislation that's very bipartisan, that looks at, as a patient, I should know when the cash price is less. This is how it works because of federal law and state law. When I go to the pharmacy, if the cash price is less than my copay, the pharmacist has to tell me that, and I have a right to the cash price.
Nice.
We think it should work that way for all healthcare services. And then at the same time, if I find a low-cost provider, even if that provider is out of network, that should count like an in-network expense towards my deductible and out-of-pocket limit, because I'm saving money and I'm paying the balance directly.
Right.
There's this unholy alliance between big insurance and big healthcare to drive up costs, because it's beneficial to everybody except for the patient and except for the healthcare provider.
It really is this sort of late stage, if you understand anything about sort of Marxist dialectic, the transition phase between capitalism, then to socialism, then to communism. Sort of we're in that phase where this socialist collusion on the way, because they know that in the end, someone is going to try to take over the medical care. So they're trying to get what they can out of the system in the near term, aren't they?
Well, and I think that what this means to the patient too is think about how intimate your relationship is with your healthcare provider, or if you receive a scary diagnosis, how much you want to go to the specialist that is recommended or that you want to go to receive that treatment.
Right.
But yet somehow we accept that both government and insurance can dramatically restrict that when they're not on the hook if I
Right.
get sicker.
Right.
It's me who's
Yeah,
personally
absolutely.
impacted in that way.
What I appreciate is I think you may be the only person I've talked to working on this who is, because I'm going to now step back a couple of things, something you said a couple of paragraphs ago, on the concept of graduate medical education, because it's one of those things where, as my wife and I have discussed, we could vastly increase the number of medical schools and medical school billets in America. And I think, frankly, that anybody who has decent grades, a decent GPA, who wants to go to medical school to become a doctor should be able to do it, or find some way to become a medical care provider. Even if we vastly expanded the number of medical schools in America and med students in America, we would still have a problem with the graduate medical education side of it. The number that what we're talking about are residency programs, the amount of time in residency. Listen, part of that, not that I want to go down a rabbit hole here, but I'm going to. The new restrictions on the amount of hours that a resident can work, that an intern can work, is a huge problem here. I remember when my wife was in her residency program and the amount of calls she was pulling, and now they can't. Anyway, it's just crazy. I'm sorry. I got up on my soapbox there, Tarren. Go ahead.
No, you're spot on. My oldest sister is a thoracic surgeon. And so when you think about sort of the training and experience, if I am going to have my chest cavity worked on, I want it worked on by a physician who has been practicing and had a lot of experience, not by somebody who's just worked, 40 hours or less per week,
Sure.
gone through that residency program and just has less experience. Now, she's in her 50s now, but has that skill and development over time. And she talks about exactly what you referenced, that different kind of residency experience is not a benefit to physicians, it's a detriment to patients.
Right.
And you want to have that experience because it turns out the human body's complicated and being a physician is really difficult.
And much in the same way that we talk about the issue of scarcity and subsidies, one of the problems that we're having is that the more pressure we take, right, when we increase demand for a good, i.e. medical care, without increasing the supply of the providers of that care, then it creates a feedback loop where the folks who are engaging in that practice of medicine are further stressed out, right? The quality of life suffers. I mean, we can talk about patient care, but at the very least, it is driving doctors out of the practice of medicine. That's a problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. And which is why you see the dramatic expansion of things like direct primary care or subscription-based medical services, because those physicians or other health professionals have decided that I don't want to be part of this dysfunctional insurance structure system. Instead, what I want to do is get outside of that system, have people pay me a set amount, and then I'll have a smaller panel of patients, but give them higher quality care. So you're right, that government dysfunction is literally creating this two-tier system of people who are outside of the system and the patients who pay for it directly compared to those who are stuck in the dysfunctional third-party system.
Let's shift gears, because I'm very cognizant of your time, and there are some other things that you guys at the Foundation for Government Accountability, I'm going to say that again, I haven't said that enough, are working on. And again, getting back into your philosophy of not just being incremental, but being diplomatic and thoughtful about how you're approaching things. Nevertheless, it's not as though you are shying away from the big issues. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're working on this at the state level. Talk about your approach. What are you guys advocating for? Where are you advocating for it? Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. I think this is a great example of dysfunctional policy that hurts individuals. America is a country that our ancestors or today's immigrants come to because they really view it as the land of opportunity. And that opportunity is not based on the color of your skin or personal choices you may or may not make. It's based on how hard you work and what you're able to achieve. And DEI is the exact opposite of that. It's saying we're going to set some arbitrary targets, and if you don't look or act in a certain way, then you're going to go to the back of the line. I think one of the most positive things we've seen in the pushback on DEI is particularly pushing back on higher education, where this whole philosophy is entrenched in a really big way. But it means rather than equal opportunity, instead it means certain individuals are favored to go into higher education, and then other individuals are held back or told that they're oppressors. And when you think about this, college isn't for everyone, but if you're going into one of these science, technology, engineering, math programs, then that is your pathway to going into that profession or medicine. And so you need to ensure that those universities are taking the top performing individuals, not that they're deciding based on some arbitrary quota who should come in and who should be held back.
Right. It goes into, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I have an aphorism that I use. The most well-intentioned policies eventually bump up against very real realities. My dad simplified it. He said, Andrew, there are many roads to utopia, however, almost traverse the surface of the earth. Talk about when the very real reality of DEI bumps up against the well-intentioned policy of it, if we can call it well-intentioned. Let's, for the sake of argument, we'll call it well-intentioned. Talk about when those two things come into conflict with each other.
Yeah, I think a good example of this is, say you have some sort of quota for somebody with a particular ethnic background. And to meet that quota, you need to have a lower grade point average or SAT score to let more people in, to arbitrarily meet that quota. That means that for certain individuals who go into, say, engineering, if your skin color is this, your standard is that. But if your skin color is different, then you have a higher or lower standard. And what that means is that those individuals who are going into the program aren't equipped to be successful, not only in that education program, but later on in the career. Or it means, and Clarence Thomas wrote about this in his autobiography, it means that people will automatically assume if you have a certain skin color and you're in a certain profession, that you got in through DEI kind of principles, not through your own merits. And so the very thing that it's trying to help, give opportunity to these individuals, it actually creates worse discrimination and assumptions for those very same individuals.
It's one of those things where I remember pointing out to somebody back in the 80s as we started to talk about diversity. And I said, really, so what we're doing is we're creating a system where we are going to underscore the differences between one another. And Tarren, I have no idea how old you are. You have a sister who's in her 50s. So clearly.
I'm 48.
You're 48. Okay. So, I just remember, you're a little bit younger than I am. I remember the Schoolhouse Rock video, The Great American Melting Pot, which is something, again, it was a principle that I take to heart. We have a common heritage, and part of that common heritage is bringing everybody together. We go into this great assimilation. If we start highlighting the differences, John Wayne said it best, I think, a hyphenated American is a divided American. We can't, actually, let's talk about this for a second, and then I want to come back to ranked choice voting. Talk about this issue of if we are highlighting the differences and we no longer have a common heritage, how do we come together to solve problems?
Well, I think you're spot on. We don't come together because we each stay in our own little tribe, and we're only comfortable by hanging out with other people in our tribe. And one of the most offensive things about DEI is defining diversity based on literally my own personal choices or the color of my skin, or my sex, rather than really looking at kind of this true diversity, which is all about life experiences. I grew up in a big family. That's a different experience. And a father who is an entrepreneur, that's a different experience than somebody who grew up, as an only child, or grew up in a more urban area compared to I grew up in a rural area. And if you think about the benefits of diversity, it is that melting pot where you have people from all these diverse life experiences coming together. not some arbitrary diversity just based on what you look like or choices that you make.
No, it's interesting to me because the other part of it, and this gets into the very name of your organization, the Foundation for Government Accountability. If you start creating these arbitrary or subjective metrics for things, it becomes much easier for those in power to manipulate those things to a certain outcome, right? So if you change college admissions so that it's no longer SATs and GPAs and to a certain extent, extracurricular activities, but all of a sudden it becomes this set of metrics that nobody can quite understand what they are. That manipulates the system, doesn't
It does. And what it also says to certain individuals is you're less than, not because of anything that you work to achieve, but because of how you were born.
Yes.
Or the flip side of that, you're more than because of how you were born. And how disempowering is that?
Which is essentially right that we were taught to criticize the caste system in India as we were growing. At least I was, and rightly so, because you're not your life should not be defined by what caste you were born into, and that's essentially what we're going. Let me shift gears here a little bit because you guys are working on, and it's not a lot of folks are working on this. You guys are working on the issue of ranked choice voting. Tell us about that, what you guys are up to, and your successes therein, and why ranked choice voting is a problem.
Sure. So ranked choice voting simply says that rather than the top vote getter winning the election, whether or not that person has a majority or a plurality, instead you're going to have this convoluted system where you need to rank your choice in choice order for all the different people who are on the ballot. And then the ballot tallying is this convoluted structure that then looks at whether it's the first choice or second or third or fourth or fifth, who then is the surviving person and wins the election. It's simply this convoluted way to get extremists to win an election. So I'll give you an example. In my home state of Maine, you had a mayor's race by ranked choice voting in Portland, Maine, where on the first ballot, the guy who got 6% then became the mayor because in all the ranked choice, as the other people fell out, he then advanced. So it's not about, creating more of an equitable structure where you get rid of so-called fringe candidates. It's instead taking something that's beautiful and simple, voting and picking the top person, and turning it into something that's complicated and confusing. And last point, what happens in this process is a lot of ballots are thrown out because I might only like one guy or 3 people, not 10 who are on the ballot. So if I stop ranking people, then my ballot is what's called exhausted. And if I don't have somebody for that, 4th, 5th, and 6th place and so on, then my ballot's thrown out completely.
It ignores the very real reality that most elections. I'm going to say this because I have a good mentor who was working on this. Most elections are binary choices, even if there are more than one candidate on a ballot. It's usually you're choosing between person A or person B. I'm choosing between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, or I'm choosing between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. It's not, I'm sort of formulating in my head out of the 3 of them what's going on here. So what states are you guys working on this in, or, go ahead.
So there's a lot of states that we're pushing to ban this at the local level. Only Maine and Alaska do it at the state level. And that was done through ballot initiative questions, putting this on the ballot, and voters who I think didn't understand sort of what it meant embraced it. And it's been really confusing in those particular states. But we're pushing to ban it in a bunch of states at the local level because that's part of the strategy of the left of get an idea entrenched in, cities, for example, and then try to build momentum to make that change at the state level.
Lowering the voting age to 16, allowing folks who are non-citizens to vote, all of these things being introduced at the local level, aren't they?
Totally. And what it also creates is this confusing dynamic where if those people are allowed to vote in local races, then who's to tell that they're not voting for people up ticket?
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, I want to shift gears a little bit. I tee this up. Most of the listeners and viewers already know this, but I need to explain it to to my guests. When I was formulating this podcast, I was at one point thinking about doing a podcast solely focused on talking to folks in politics and public policy about their outside interests. I think we tend to see folks as, policy nerds or political nerds, and they're real people who are out there. And so I've started asking my guests this question. When you're not engaging, now you made the move 1,600 miles from Maine to Florida, quality of life issues certainly abound down there. When you're not doing your work for the FGA, when you're not traveling, when you're not doing interviews like this, what are you up to? How are you spending your free time? What are your outside interests?
Sure. So great question. I can tell you that as a father of four, probably my biggest hobby is being a dad, and frankly, one of the most rewarding things. There's nothing like being a parent to make me more appreciative of my own parents and the challenges I put them through. But it's been fun to have my kids participate in different opportunities that I get because of the policy work. So, for example, our daughter, I was able to take her and have her go on this behind the scenes tour of the US Capitol last year that she completely loved. And there was this special trap door in the Lincoln Room. She got to write her name on the wall inside this abandoned area of the Capitol. Really cool stuff like that. And then, so that's been a lot of fun.
That's fun.
My wife really likes to travel, and so I've developed that. We've been married 21 years, and I've developed that interest. So we've been able to travel with our family to some different places. This past summer, we went to Iceland.
Excellent.
In fact, went to the community that was evacuated because of the volcano eruption recently.
Sure.
And so that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
And so I would say probably parenting and travel.
Sure.
And then my oldest son is interested in being an entrepreneur. And so we're testing some different ideas. He's 17. And that's been a lot of fun too.
It's terrific. Yeah, it's they had at my daughter's elementary school, my younger daughter's elementary school, they had an invention day. And
that's a cool idea.
She came up with a really, really great invention, which at some point she may pick that back up. That's so much fun. So, Tarren, how do folks find out more about the good work that the Foundation for Government Accountability is up to?
So the best way is to take a look at our website, which is the FGA, FGA.org. You can see what we've done in particular states. You can also see our policy solutions, some of which we've talked about, and see what we're focused on federally. So that's a great way to stay connected with us. You can also follow us on X at the FGA.org or the FGA as well.
At the FGA on X, formerly known as Twitter. I still call it Twitter.
It's easier.
I'm not changing it. Anyway, Tarren Bragdon, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It's really been a pleasure.
And this has been yet another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Please, go and check us out. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can also catch us on every major podcast platform. Likewise, if you're listening to us on one of those platforms and you want to see what we're doing here on the Lunch Hour, go and check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, leave us a like, leave us a review, let your friends know and your family members know, let everybody know that you're listening to the Lunch Hour, watching the Lunch Hour. Thank you so very much. As always, enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.